Have you ever wondered what kept medieval cities from collapsing under their own filth? Not knights, not kings, not even doctors. It was a group of workers you were never supposed to see. Men who stepped into the darkness every night, climbed down into the earth, and dealt with the one part of medieval life everyone pretended didn't exist. Their job was so secret, so disturbing, and so strangely important. That history quietly buried their story today. You're going to discover the medieval workers who protected entire cities in ways you were never taught, and the hidden world they lived in beneath your feet. You would never meet them in daylight. That was the unspoken rule. The medieval townsfolk who walked the streets in the brightness of morning had no reason to know the faces of the men who had protected them through the night. They preferred to imagine that their world was kept clean by natural forces, by rain, by wind, by anything other than human hands. It was easier to pretend this way. But beneath the cobbled alleys, under the slanted roofs and cramped wooden houses, the truth of medieval life was maintained by a group of workers whose existence was both necessary and deliberately forgotten. They were called nightmen, or more commonly in England, gong farmers. They were the invisible guardians of cities that would otherwise have drowned in their own living waste. Long before the morning bells rang, while inns and bakeries were still dark, and when taverns had only just begun to quiet from the late drinkers, the nightmen were already moving. You might imagine the Middle Ages as an era of noble knights, candlelit halls, and artisans working in sunny workshops. But the reality of life for most people was far less glamorous. Human waste, animal waste, kitchen refuse, rotting food accumulated everywhere. Chamber pots were emptied into narrow streets. Privies built against the sides of houses overflowed. Entire districts filled with pits where households dumped what they hoped would eventually disappear. But nothing disappeared on its own. Not really. It only sank, layered itself, seeped into the soil, and stayed there until someone dug it out. Cities in medieval Europe had quickly discovered what would happen if no one dealt with the growing mountain of filth. Outbreaks of disease spread like wind through the tightly packed homes. Rats and insects swarmed. The smell clung to everything: clothing, walls, hair, food. For many towns, the answer came in the form of a small, secretive profession. They worked unseen, received high wages by medieval standards, and lived isolated lives. They handled what everyone else wanted to forget: the sludge, the waste, the filth of thousands in the quiet hours before dawn. When you would hear only the rattle of a distant wagon or the grunt of a mule, the gong farmers prepared their tools. Their equipment was simple but essential: long-handled shovels, leather gloves, heavy boots, rope, wooden buckets, and a cart. Many wore thick aprons coated in oil to keep the worst of the moisture out. They tied cloths soaked in vinegar on their faces when the stench grew overpowering, though even that did little. Once ready, they set out to the private latrines and cesspits of the city, unlocked for them by city guards or hired household servants who refused to linger near their presence for long. The nightmen moved silently, their footsteps soft in the narrow alleys, their lanterns bobbing in the pitch-black streets. Some cesspits were older than the houses above them. Layers upon layers of waste had hardened into a kind of dark sediment that required immense strength to break apart. Sometimes, a cesspit collapsed under the weight of the structure above, taking floorboards, furniture, and even entire rooms with it. When this happened, nightmen were called urgently, though rarely did anyone thank them for saving a household from sinking into its own sewage. The work itself was slow, heavy, and suffocating. Nightmen climbed into pits, their feet sinking into the warm sludge as they began to shovel upward, filling bucket after bucket. A partner above hauled the buckets up with ropes, dumping them into the cart. Depending on the size of the pit, this could take hours. The waste known as night soil was then transported outside the city walls to fields, where farmers paid good money for it as fertilizer. It was an unpleasant cycle, but one that fed entire populations. Despite being paid relatively well, nightmen were social outcasts. No one wanted to shake their hands or breathe the air near them. Children whispered stories about them, tales of men who lived underground, half-human creatures who climbed ladders of filth and crawled into the earth at night. Even adults avoided eye contact, quickly stepping aside on the street if they happened to see one of these workers in the rare daylight hours. For this reason, nightmen often lived on the outskirts of towns, where the smell would bother fewer neighbors and where their presence would not disrupt respectable society. Their lives were governed by laws too. In many cities, they were restricted from working during the day. In London, for example, statutes specifically forbade gong farmers from operating between sunrise and sunset. Their carts of night soil were considered a public nuisance, and no one wanted to risk running into them on the way to market. So the night belonged to them, and the day belonged to everyone else. Yet, for all the stigma surrounding them, the work of the nightmen was more essential than many prestigious trades of the time. Without them, cities would have collapsed under the weight of their own waste. Outbreaks of disease would have spread faster and more violently. Streets would have been unlivable. But because their contributions were tied to something unpleasant, medieval society chose to hide them, to keep their work in the shadows. But what made their job so secretive was not only the nature of their work, it was also what they discovered. Imagine descending into a cesspit beneath a wealthy merchant's home and finding more than just waste. Nightmen were not thieves nor spies, but they often learned the secrets of a household without meaning to. Lost jewelry, hidden letters, small objects accidentally dropped through holes in the floor. They found them all. Some cesspits contained items deliberately thrown away to conceal wrongdoing. A blood-stained cloth, a broken weapon, a ledger with suspicious accounts. Because they worked alone and unwatched, the nightmen knew more about the private lives of the wealthy than any servant did. But they never spoke of these discoveries. Silence was part of their survival. There were stories whispered in taverns, always by people who had never done the work themselves, about cursed cesspits, about men swallowed whole by the shifting sludge, about strange gases that could knock a worker unconscious before he climbed back out. These stories, exaggerated or not, fed the dark image of nightmen as men who dealt with forces better left alone. The reality was far simpler. Cesspits released methane, hydrogen sulfide, and ammonia. In an era before chemistry was understood, these invisible dangers were mysterious and deadly. Many nightmen carried small candles with them, not to see, but to test the air. If the flame burned weakly or went out, they knew the gases inside were too thick to survive. The secrecy surrounding their work also came from societal shame, not theirs. Other professions took pride in what they produced. A blacksmith could hold up a sword. A weaver could display a bolt of cloth. A carpenter could point to the beams of a roof. But the nightman's work was something no one wanted to acknowledge. His success was measured by absence. The absence of disease. The absence of overflowing pits. The absence of unbearable stench. His work was invisible by design. Yet the job offered something rare in medieval society: mobility. A nightman earned enough to support a family, to afford meat more often than peasants, to buy sturdy boots and warm clothing for winter. Some even saved enough to leave the trade entirely, moving into small-scale farming or craft work. But most stayed. The wages were too good to give up. And in a world where survival was uncertain, certainty had value still. Despite the benefits, the dangers were ever present. There were accounts of pits collapsing while men were inside, burying them in waste. Some workers suffocated from toxic fumes before anyone realized they were in trouble. Others fell from ladders slick with moisture or slipped on the uneven floor of a pit. A few cities tried to improve safety by adding stone linings to cesspits or designing better ventilation. But these efforts were inconsistent and often too expensive. There were lighter moments, two small flashes of human life amid the unpleasantness. Nightmen often worked in pairs or small groups, and humor was their shield against the world's disgust. They told jokes, teased one another, and shared gossip heard from the edges of city life. They formed tight-knit communities, bound by the shared reality that no one else wanted to understand. And sometimes, they were the first to hear stories carried through nighttime streets: the birth of a child, the passing of a neighbor, the arrival of a merchant caravan. The world felt quieter at night, more honest. And though their work was hidden, they were present for the moments others slept through. By dawn, the nightmen's carts rolled through the city gates, heading for fields beyond the walls. Farmers waited for the night soil, eager to spread it on their land. They understood the value of the work better than city dwellers did. To them, the nightmen were not outcasts but essential partners. They greeted them without fear or disgust, exchanging news and sometimes sharing food. This respect meant a great deal to the workers, who spent most of their lives being avoided. When the sun finally rose and the first market stalls opened, the nightmen were already gone, returning to their small homes to wash as best they could and rest. Their world shrank again as the city came alive, the people walking streets that were cleaner, safer, and more livable because of the invisible labor done in darkness. The cycle repeated every night, every season, every year. What medieval workers did in secret was not glamorous. It was not heroic in the way history often chooses to remember. But it was work that sustained life, prevented crisis, and shaped societies quietly from beneath. And yet, you were never told this, not because the story lacked importance, but because it lacked elegance. History often hides its most crucial truths in the shadows, just as medieval cities hid the men who kept them functioning. But if you walk the narrow streets of an old European town today, if you look closely at the slanted lines of buildings, the uneven alleys, the strange gaps between houses, you might notice remnants of a hidden infrastructure beneath your feet. Ancient cesspit covers buried under paving stones, streets that slope ever so slightly toward forgotten drains. In these details, the memory of the nightmen lingers. They were the quiet protectors, the invisible caretakers, the men who handled what no one else would. And though their work is rarely mentioned in history books, the truth remains. Every comfortable medieval life depended on them. Every feast in a noble hall, every crowded market, every warm household, all were made possible because someone, somewhere, was willing to descend into the darkness, to shovel away the past so the present could continue. Their world was not written in ink or carved into stone. Their legacy is one of absence, of what they carried away, night after night, under the cover of darkness. And while their names were forgotten, their impact was not. For in the long, unending story of human survival, sometimes the most important chapters are the ones you were never meant to see. Thank you for spending this quiet moment in history with me. If this slow, sleepy journey helped you unwind or taught you something new, I'd truly appreciate it if you gently tap the like button and subscribe to Quiet Boring Sleep. Your support helps this little corner of calm history continue to grow, and it means more than you know. Rest well, stay curious, and I'll see you in the next quiet story. Good night.